If you have ever wanted to give Switch Axe a try, now is the perfect time for it, as Switch Axe, despite already being very powerful and versatile in base Rise, got some of the best additions among all 14 weapons in Sunbreak. The Switch Axe only really had 3 downsides in my opinion, being that it isn't a very mobile weapon, it requires some micromanagement, and it lacks a defensive option. However, all of these problems were addressed and fixed, if you will, in Sunbreak, and in quite a flashy way I might add. In Sunbreak, Switch Axe gains access to Elemental Burst Counter, a Silkbind move that uses 2 wire bugs, an extremely powerful counter that, if activated at the right time, will not only negate the damage of the attack you were about to receive, but it will also fill up your EMP gauge in its entirety and put you into the EMP state immediately, all the while dealing a crazy amount of damage. The timing of the counter can be a bit tricky to pull off consistently. It has a little bit of a delay in the startup animation, but if you are able to get used to it and master Elemental Burst Counter, you will be a menace for all the monsters you hunt in Sunbreak. This Silkbind move requires the use of 2 wire bugs, so it is costly, but it has a very fast recharge time, and the fact that it puts you into the empty state immediately means that you don't have to spend time and worry about getting there and waste all of your sword energy. You just play the weapon normally, and if there's an opening and you feel like the monster is about to attack, you start up the counter and you just time it at the right moment, and there you go. Now you countered an attack and you can deal even more damage. What's cool about this move as well is that it has a very short recharge time for your wire bugs, which combined with the other new Silkbind attack that was introduced in Sunbreak, Wire Step, makes it so that you can play through an entire hunt without getting hit a single time, because Wire Step is a Silkbind move that only costs a single wire bug, and it is an evasion technique that allows you to morph into Axe mode while flanking the enemy. The Wire Step animation lasts a very long time, and you have invincibility frames the entire time. So between the Elemental Burst Counter and Wire Step, you're pretty much invincible. And again, the Silkbind attack also has a very short cooldown on your wire bugs. So what this means now is that with the Switch Axe, you can just focus on keeping up the aggression on the monsters, use Elemental Burst Counter to go into the amped state, and whenever you're running out of sword energy, you can swap to a different switch skill loadout, and use the old Silkbind attack Switch Charger to get your sword meter back up, so you can continue to spam your attacks in the amped state. Honestly, my biggest problem with the Switch Axe before was that you had a lot of downtime when you didn't have the amped state and you would need to build it back up, but at the same time, if you're trying to build up the amped state, you would be using your sword energy, so you would be running out of sword energy, and then you would need to use Switch Charger to get it back up. But now you can easily remain in the amped state and with sword energy for a very long time with the use of these 2 Silkbinds. Elemental Burst Counter and Switch Charger take up the same slot, so again you'll need to change switch skill loadouts in order to use them. There's also a new switch skill which was added in Sunbreak, which is the 2-staged morph / combo. As the name indicates, it is a 2-staged morph / attack that follows the next wild swing. By pressing the R2 button on PlayStation controllers, you go from Axe mode into Sword mode, and you can press it again to go back into the Axe mode. During this combo, the power of Sword mode attacks is increased and Axe mode attacks will also fill up your switch gauge faster. Again, it's not like you really need to build up your switch gauge when you have the Switch Charger Silkbind, but it is a good option to have. Frankly, I don't really use this too much, but maybe I should, especially because in Sunbreak, if we take a look at the patch notes that were added to the game, the Axe mode on the Switch Axe was buffed across the board. So now the weapon isn't as reliant on Sword mode, but you have a lot more options to get into Sword mode. But if you want to stay in Axe mode, or just because it is favorable at that moment to use it, then it is even more powerful, and you have the addition of 2 staged morph / combo to buff sword mode and also get your switch gauge faster. Sunbreak has managed to add some complexity to the weapon without making it feel too complex. I personally fell in love with this weapon once again. I haven't really played too much switch axe ever since for Ultimate. I felt like the weapon was a bit too simplistic, but because it is so flashy and satisfying to pull off a zero-sum discharge, I would always take out the switch axe for a couple of hunts every now and again. But now it looks like this is going to be my main weapon in Sunbreak. It just feels very satisfying to pull off the elemental burst counter, and the weapon is a lot of fun. I also asked you guys in the community tab on YouTube how you guys felt about switch axe in Sunbreak, because I know it is one of the most popular weapons in the game, and I wasn't sure if I was going to main it in the expansion, but I got a lot of good comments from you guys, so let's take a look at some of them. Monster Kev says it's gotta be the elemental burst counter. It is one of the most satisfying things the weapon has ever had, and that's with zero-sum discharge in there as well. And yeah, both of those moves are incredibly satisfying to use, and they just were able to make the switch axe even flashier than it was before, and it truly is one of the best weapons in the game now. Sunbreak switch axe has truly turned into a glass cannon unlike the older entries, and I absolutely love it. Sunbreak is the first time I ever had to think when playing the switch axe. I never thought I would find a new appreciation for a weapon I main. That is true, because now you do have wire step, which you can use to avoid incoming attacks and use the iframes to go through it, but of course you can also use the elemental burst counter, which does require a little bit of planning ahead, as again, it has a little bit of a startup animation that you need to take into account. Been a switch axe boy since for Ultimate, and it gets exponentially cooler every game. That's right, they added zero-sum discharge in World, and now we have the elemental burst counter and wire step. The devs have really made a great job here with the switch axe. They've done a good job with all of the weapons, but switch axe? It's looking really good. I picked it up during World as my secondary to Sword and Shield, and I've loved it ever since. The morphing between Sword and Axe mode was always so cool to me. It provides a challenge as well, by being quite hard to maneuver with while having it drawn. However, learning how to dodge while utilizing the morphing attacks was extremely satisfying, almost like a dance between you and the monster. I've switched to the compressed finisher in Sunbreak because I've always felt cooler using it. And yeah, that is pretty much an accurate description of how the switch axe works. Now we just have even more powerful tools to use in Sunbreak. I've also got plenty of comments saying that they didn't get used to the counter, but of course you are not forced to use the counter. If you don't like it, you can always switch it for a different skill. That's one of the great things about the switch skill loadouts that we have in Sunbreak. I love Sunbreak switch axe. I made it for the campaign and developed a playstyle that wouldn't be possible without Sunbreak, making heavy use of switch skill swapping in order to more or less permanently stay in sword mode, which is what I was saying earlier, as I always found it was the more fun form of the weapon. The counter was the last nail in the coffin to this end, as it entirely forgoes the need for heavy slam, which I always found awkward to fit in, as well as making power files a bit more comfortable to use, since they don't take 17 millennia to fill up 2 amps anymore. Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. The part that I disliked the most about the switch axe was not the lack of mobility or the lack of a defensive option, it was really the downtime whenever you had to build up the amped state, and I also agree that I didn't really like using heavy slam all that much. But now with elemental burst counter, all of the problems are fixed. But yeah, these are the reasons why I really do believe that you should give switch axe a try, and if you have ever wanted to try out switch axe, now is the perfect time. I will be making a couple of videos in the future talking about the best builds for switch axe and also some of the more comfortable and fun builds to use in the game as well. So be on the lookout for that, and in the meantime, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting.